Hi, I'm Jeff Nyquist. This is another edition of Friends and Enemies. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. I'm here in the United States, and we're going to talk about the interplay between science and the occult in terms of Nazi experiments. It's kind of shocking what they do. I think that it's clear to me that the Russians have conducted these same experiments or know about them. The CIA in the U.S. I think there's plenty of evidence in the testimony that there's an awareness of a connection between these kind of experiments and the occult. So, Alex, why don't you explain to us what under the Third Reich were they doing at Auschwitz and experimenting on people using occult, what is it, occult techniques, parapsychology? How would you characterize it?
Well, the there was no clear distinction back then between science and the occult, and this is something that we've seen in other places too. Of course, the further you go back in history, the more you see these things intertwine. By now, we have new data on famous scientists of the last couple hundred years, and when they some of them actually did some outrageously good work, but at the same time, they were into spiritualism and members of like the Ghost Society and just were very, very interested in the occult. So it was like a dual system of during the day you're a scientist, in your spare time you're an occultist, and sometimes these things even come together because you may interpret your everyday work in an occult sense, right? So there's different ways to do that. Now, the reason why I wanted to get into this topic today is the current wave of propaganda, which is partially directed by Alexander Dugin. And we saw Mr. Dugin, Mr. Dugin from the Russian side, and of course, family goes back to older generations, of course, and they were involved in the Russian Soviet system and the intelligence services over there. And we've heard crazy experiments about Russia. We have data on crazy experiments by the Russians. And so now we saw Dugin sort of give a shout out to his favorite American influencers. So he says he loves Tucker Carlson. He loves these kinds of people. He tells you who the good guys supposedly are, the persons you should trust now that people are scared, obviously, of the escalation on a global scale, the war with Iran, and the bigger conflict that's looming in the background. So people get scared. They want to get answers. And so Dugin is saying, these are the people you get to get your answers from. And we saw Alex Jones interact with Dugin. We saw Tucker Carlson interact with Dugin. The new right wing interact with Dugin, and they all seem to consider him a great philosopher and a great leader, a smart person to follow. And it's bizarre for people like us when we know about Dugin's occult background. I mean, he was like one of the original guys. He had the protection of his father. Alexander Dugin didn't want to have a normal job for a long time. He wanted to be an occultist and have the occultism dictate policy and politics. Now, even today, when he talks about his concepts of East and West and blah blah blah, it's very occult. I mean, he's always in this mindset. So there's no clear distinction for him. And that's not just the end of it. I mean, you could say, yeah, he dabbled in the occult, blah blah blah, but it's far more serious than that. And if people actually find this little anecdote about Dugin, it says Dugin adopted an alter ego with the name of Hans Sievers, a reference to Wolfram Sievers, a Nazi researcher of the paranormal, to put it mildly, under the
Dugan.
pseudonym.
So hold on. Under what circumstances does he use this German name?
Well, under this pseudonym, transcribed as Hans Sievers in Cyrillic, he recorded even a musical album. in the 80s. So he used that for a while. And so this is one of the references that are far more serious than, let's say, him referencing the writings of Julius Evola, and we've done a whole show about that guy, right? And it's much darker than what people think it is, because it's always easier to say, oh, people should read Evola. That's easier to sell than to tell people they should look into people like Wolfram Sievers, who were
actually, Julius Evola and Sievers have something in common because they both worked for the SS Annenberg.
yeah. So who was that guy? Because nowadays, at the current moment, with the war against Iran, which there are many reasons for that, and it's far more complex than the usual answers that you can hear on the web. But with this war going on, we see a lot of these pro-Russian influencers here in the West, or the pro-Dugin influencers in the West, like Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones and others. Now we hear these influencers. These influencers actually talk about Hasidic Jews and the Chabad group, and supposedly this is for the audience, or large parts of the audience, this is the same as the Elders of Zion, which don't exist. This is supposed to be the same.
But the Chabad group does exist. But what's interesting is so many of these people say that, for example, that the United States is controlled by these Jews.
Yes,
right.
And so
they say that Putin is also a Jew, a secret Jew, and they say he's a secret Jew.
Yeah,
they'll say Dugin's a
people went
secret Jew.
overboard with this idea. I mean, equating a group like Chabad, and which came out of this Kabbalah tradition, especially from the European phase of Jews and the Kabbalah. People went overboard with this theory that Chabad is everything, and the Chabad really controls everybody and everything. But
they're a very small sect of in Judaism, aren't they? They're not very numerous.
No, and it's like we talked about this in a previous episode when the average Jew is usually open to Kabbalah tradition, but they don't really get into it that much, or they don't want to have, or they don't understand people like these super Orthodox Jews. It's like there's like a disconnect. But now we see these influencers who love Dugin and don't admit that Dugin is a hardcore occultist. These influencers are now claiming to be experts on Jewish occultism, which is supposed to be like the Elders of Zion. This is supposed to be the heart of the conspiracy. Like these Jewish networks, they had sort of almost a monopoly on. It sounds like almost a monopoly on occultism, and that's how they took over everything.
These are Hasidim. These are the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is about 90 to 95,000 people, right? Out of, I think there are 20 million Jews worldwide, maybe.
And also
maybe not that many.
And also Europe. I mean, Europe, all over the place here. Doesn't matter which empire you pick. Doesn't matter what century you pick. There was occultism everywhere. The empires or different factions in these empires, they all celebrated ancient mystery cults and reinterpreted them any way they wanted. So this idea that somehow Jews had this monopoly, or Jews were taking everything over with their esoteric Kabbalah, that idea is nonsense. But now this is supposed to explain the Iran war. This is supposed to explain why Trump is behaving a certain way, why his administration is behaving a certain way. This is supposed to explain everything. Jewish occultism or Jewish Kabbalah is supposed to explain the big conspiracy. But let's get into Dugin's occultism. Let's get into what this guy is into. And when pop stars are now referencing Hitler and saying they love Hitler, I think it was Kanye West with a song, if I'm not mistaken.
There's that thing going on there.
Yeah, and Fuentes, and influencers like Nick Fuentes and others who make these statements about the Nazis or make allusions to the Nazis. while simultaneously claiming to fight the Jewish conspiracy or the Jewish occult conspiracy. Let's get into the Nazi occultism.
Just to note, the Chabad Jews are only 13% of the Hasidic Jews, and they're just a tiny percentage of worldwide Jewry. So it's so strange, and I think most Jews are secular, and they probably look at these people and go, "What the heck," you know? So I don't understand the idea that they're running the world behind the scenes.
Yeah, and if you hear, I mean, if you hear constantly on the web, if you hear about Chabad this and Hasidic Jews that and Molech and blah blah blah, if you only hear that and you don't understand history, especially European history, you don't understand how this European craziness came to the U.S. from all kinds of directions, or even from Russia, then you have a skewed view on reality. You don't understand what a big game occultism really is, and who was so dominant in this game for such a long time. So be careful out there whom you're following. You know, either it's Dugin directly or Dugin's people, Dugin's favorite influencers. So Dugin was fascinated by Wolfram Sievers. Let me just put up a picture of this guy on the screen here so people can actually get a glimpse of this man. So that's him. He's got the weird beard. This is was this a mugshot? This could have been.
Do they allow facial hair in the SS when he joined the SS, or is this?
I probably made an exemption for him because as an occultist, for some strange reason, you need to have this huge beard. That's kind of like a given. So yeah, okay, yeah, this is a mugshot. This is in U.S. custody. This is him being not happy. This is
after his arrest.
Yeah, this is when it hits him. This is when.
And I assume they hanged him.
This is accountability, the face of accountability. That's what it looks like. So he was both an occultist and he was also overseeing medical research. Interestingly enough, so they could experiment on humans.
But he was not a medical doctor, was he?
Not at all. So when you have institutions, when you have a pipeline, fresh people, fresh victims coming in, you can do whatever you want. And a part of it was for the stated purpose of figuring out what kind of what can a person survive, in terms of a soldier, for example. So he's
a Reich science leader? Am I reading that German right?
Reichsgeschäftsführer. It means he was
science leader?
Director General. He was Director General.
I see, Director General.
And he was overseeing science, even though he was not really an expert in that field at all.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so
that's freaking crazy.
So you have like this. You have experiments, and I have this interesting.
And his areas of study were history, philosophy, and religious studies, but his real interest was the occult, right?
Exactly. So there's always a cover for everything. I mean, if you're into, if you study history, you may be interested in the dark aspects of history, and you want to emulate them. Or you study philosophy, that's always could be a cover for the dark philosophy. Or you
did this guy practice ritual magic?
Oh, definitely. I mean, he was right up there with the most famous guys that everybody knows their names, but not necessarily his name.
And did he know Aleister Crowley?
I'm not sure if there's a direct connection, but I'm guessing that there's like this thing. Crowley had an interest, like most occultists had an interest in the Nazis because they could do so many things without anybody interfering. You didn't have to do this. In faraway places, you could do this on your home turf all day long, every day. Conduct medical experiments.
Get financing from the SS.
So you can have medical experiments, but you also could have human sacrifice in terms of an occult type of research and figure out if you can actually make something happen, manifest
And,
something that you
yeah.
actually want.
People don't realize it was Himmler more than any of the other Nazi leaders, top leaders that was into the occult, interested in it very much, wanting to revive paganism. I think it was his secret ambition. Tasked with the task of creating a new religion or emerging Christianity, which with whatever he would, he had in his train, in his personal train, Himmler had a car that was completely devoted to religious studies. And of course, the Führer, Adolf Hitler, was to be the messiah of this new religion. And of course, what they did in Christianity was they called it positive Christianity. They were in the business of altering Christian theology in the Third Reich. And of course, this was their religious movement. But at the same time, they were doing these occult experiments. People don't realize that Himmler's gang of SS, they were bodyguards for Hitler originally, but they a lot of them had higher education and they wanted to do research. They wanted to find the Holy Grail. They wanted to find Atlantis, the homeland of the Aryans, perhaps, whether it was Atlantis or the Himalayas. They had an expedition to Tibet. They were very much into researching these occult subjects and weird science, lost civilizations, and so on. So they were an interesting bunch.
Yeah, and also you know that Hitler was very concerned about his health for a very long time. He obviously wasn't doing so well for a big stretch in his career. He told this all kinds of people over and over again. He didn't expect to live very long. And this is, of course, where occultism comes in. When you want to go on after death, you want to join the entities, you want to join other dimensions, but there's like a manual to this. Occultists are always obsessed with a manual. You have to perform rituals, perform certain things, uncover lost rituals or partially lost rituals, experiment in that way until you unlock because you unlock the doors and you can push through and then achieve your goals. So this man studied history, philosophy, and religious studies at Stuttgart in the south. He was in various organizations as a younger guy. Joined the Nazi Party in 1929. That's not exactly early. I think most of the powerful people, they joined a couple of years earlier.
That was before they came to power, so that
yes,
gives them some credit.
Yes, but some people, they joined in like 1923. In 1933, so this is when the takeover happened, or this is when the regime was established. In 1933, he headed the Externsteine Foundation. Now, this is a magical thing, which had been founded by Heinrich Himmler to study the Externsteine in the Teutoburger Forest. Now, this is what we mean here. This is a sandstone rock formation. And this whole forest, it was supposed to have magical qualities. So it's very romantic.
Isn't that the forest where the Roman legions were destroyed when Germany revolted from Roman control in, like, I don't know what it was, 6, 7, 8 AD?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, actually.
I believe that is the forest where those
Germany
eagles were lost by
because
Germany is Romans.
Germany is not that big, and so yeah, the site, or this site that had occult meaning for many people. The site was within the county of Lippe, a lordship or an imperial estate. I think this is even tied to the same family, same aristocracy. Schaumburg, Lippe. Some of these names are even around today. Powerful people attached to it, like the aristocrats. Some aristocrats were into the occult as well, and some of these families are still around. So he was fascinated by this. He joined the SS Mr. Sievers, the idol or one of the influences on Dugin. In 1935, he joined the SS, and later that year, Himmler appointed Sievers to the position of General Secretary of the Ahnenerbe. Was the actual director of the Ahnenerbe operations, and then he headed the Institute for Military Scientific Research, which conducted extensive experiments using human subjects. Now, the Ahnenerbe was many things. They were trying to find mystical origins of the Aryan
Well,
race.
I'm a little just one question. I'm a little out of step with SS ranks. He was a equivalent of a captain. Is that what that rank is?
Let me just see this real quick. Well, he rose to the rank of SS Standartenführer. It's a
Is that a captain
paramilitary
or?
rank. It's a
You're
paramilitary
right.
rank.
So what does
Uh,
that mean? What is that equivalent to in military rank?
um, uh,
Just to get an
the
idea
next
of
higher
his.
rank, the next higher rank would have been Oberführer. The next lower
Now,
rank would have been
Oberfuhrer is a colonel, isn't it? Or no,
Obersturmbannführer.
Obersturmbannführer is a
Yeah,
colonel.
equivalent
Yeah,
ranks Oberst or Colonel.
yeah.
Is that
Oberst is
correct?
colonel. Yeah, yeah.
Well, but yeah, but
So,
it's a bit different in the with the Germans than with
so
the
he's
Americans.
so he's like a captain or a major. His rank.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But he as well again he joined the party a little bit late, so that's why he didn't have the super top spot. He was not the Oberführer.
Right. Well, he looks quite young. He looks. I mean, when you look at the age of captains and majors, they look about the age in that picture. So,
Yeah, he was
they
born
look.
in
They're usually a captain
1905.
is somebody around 30. A
Yeah,
major's usually somebody in their mid to late 30s. You get to a colonel, you're 40 or so. I mean, just on average. I mean, there's exceptions, of course.
yeah. And so the Ahnenerbe they try to find magic secrets, rediscover magic secrets through experimentation, ritual experimentation. They try to falsify history, build this sort of superstructure, this ideological,
Now, a
religious,
question:
spiritual
when you say
superstructure.
falsify history, they're trying to make a kind of mythological
Yeah, it's what
Aryan
empires
kind of
do.
nation.
It's
Yeah.
what empires do. I mean, we've seen this for 10,000 years, starting in Mesopotamia when somebody took over a previous structure and then changed this structure, this area's history, merging gods and claiming that your thing was really older than their thing, but connected. So you could always just change people's way of thinking, and so this was Himmler's big, very big plaything, right? Um, so Himmler wanted a prehistoric research institute, and they sort of had to tie it to something real or something tangible as well. So this
So
is
they're
why,
looking for the basic ancient roots of the German race, right?
yes, exactly. And they were looking for the ancient magic power of the Aryan race because this power was supposedly lost due to unpure marriages and this general problem of the material world. So they really wanted to reconnect with the magic powers of the past. And racial purification was just one element, and just destroying Jewish people was just one element. But they also needed this or wanted this occult element to it. It's again a manual. Occultists, they follow manuals, and
It's very strange because if you read Tacitus on the Germans, the Germanicus, which is a famous work by the Roman historian Tacitus, he describes the Germans as a blondish, red-haired, fierce, blue-eyed race who did not mix with other people, and they all had the same appearance: the blue eyes and the blondish red hair. And today, the Germans do not have this uniform appearance that they had,
no,
2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, he said, this is how they all looked. They didn't mix with other people, so they didn't have brown-eyed Germans. They didn't have Germans with black hair. The Germans had this particular look. Now, maybe he was exaggerating, but this is what we find in the Germanicus being reported by a
Yeah,
Roman
but ultimately,
historian, a
yeah,
military
ultimately
historian.
the Roman Empire kind of spilled over into the south of Germany, where I
Well,
am
they
now.
actually took over. They actually
Yeah,
took over Germany at one point under the Emperor Augustus. They conquered it for several years, but then it revolted, and it destroyed. I think 4 Roman legions were destroyed, if I'm not remembering correctly. And they
yeah, they
later
learned
launched
from the
an
Romans.
expedition.
They exactly they learned from the Romans, and this is when
Yeah, the
things
Rome, and it was
got
in
wild.
Teutoburg Forest, I think, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
and
And
also you
they
saw
launched
kind
an
of
expedition
yeah,
to recover the lost eagles. They
and
actually had a punitive expedition.
The Germanic tribes, they had their own occultism. They had the druidic stuff, and they
Mhm.
had some craziness as well. And they liked psychedelics, like specific
The
mushrooms, and
ancient Germans took psychedelics.
everyone did. Yeah, it grows everywhere.
Mushroom,
It grows everywhere.
mushrooms.
I mean, literally,
You
you
mean
could go to most people's garden and find very powerful psychedelic flowers, and you could smoke the stuff and have a wild trip. Yeah, it's
but
also this.
they didn't smoke that. Did they smoke that? They just ate it, right? Or
Yeah,
they
yeah,
cooked it?
you could get an extract out of
I think
fungi.
bindweed flower flowers, the bloom of blind,
Yeah,
it has some kind of hallucinogen
so
product, but you
we
have
had
to
these
like
cults.
cook
So
it or something.
we had some of these cults. The Romans
Don't
brought
do
their
this at
stuff.
home.
The Romans brought their stuff, and so then it merged, right? And the Nazis were kind of, they saw themselves at the forefront of this merger, the Germanic and the Roman Empire. You know, they wanted to be the next Roman Empire and do it better than these aristocracies had done
But
it.
they already did that. That was the Germans. The West Roman Empire was taken over by Germanic tribes.
Yes,
They
yes.
carved it all
And so
up.
now,
The
yeah, and
Vandals
so
took Africa.
yeah.
The Ostrogoths took Italy, right?
Yeah, and so now you get
Yeah.
people like me. I have, slightly darker brown hair, but I have green blue eyes, right? So this is kind of
Mhm.
like the south of Germany here. This is where it all kind of merged. And the Nazis were obsessed with this, right? But they thought
Mhm.
they had to recalibrate because Hitler had like brown hair, or I think he had, did he have blue eyes? I don't remember exactly, but
Yeah, his eyes were very blue.
people made fun of the
He
Nazi
had
leadership
light
because
blue.
they
He had
didn't look
light
like,
blue
yeah.
eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, but people were making fun of the Nazi leadership because it didn't look like the blonde Vikings, right? So they had this
Hmm.
idea that they had
No,
to
none of them were blonde that I can remember.
re-Nordify. There was actually a German term they made up, Aufnorden. They had to re-Nordify the Germans, so to make them more
Mhm.
blonde again.
Yeah,
Or
because
yeah,
I think the Germans, through the chaos of the Middle Ages, they ended up mixing with Romans and other people,
yeah,
and Slavs, and they ended up not
um,
being
yeah,
this pure race.
and so there's like again, there's a manual to it. They had like a tangible manual for organizing who could marry, who could not get married, who needed to die, who needed to be privileged. And they had this idea of course, filling up, well, taking other people's space and filling it up with German babies, and just become more Nordic every generation until they get to the stated goal. But there was an occult, very specific occult component to this. Just having, you know, more blonde babies every generation was not enough. They wanted the magic. They wanted the magic powers. So they created the Ahnenerbe. But they had all kinds of people working for it. It was people from archaeology, anthropology, ethnology, runology, classics history, musicology, philology, biology, zoology, botany, astronomy, and medicine. So some of the stuff that they did was strictly military research. So what can a person actually survive? You know, what kind of disease or heat or cold or injuries? What does a person need to survive? What can you get away with? So this is where a lot of these human experiments came out of. But of course, if you have this infrastructure for human experimentation, that's a perfect infrastructure for the occult. This was um, so here it says they had a guy named Walter Wüst who was very high up in this organization, and they cut off Karl Maria Willigut, who was also a very high level occultist from Austria. So he had already served in the Austro-Hungarian army during World War I, leading figure in German occultism. But there was like a competition between these occultists. So Willigut was kind of out of this organization here. And then of course they had different projects going on when this organization came about. They had expeditions to Iceland, Karelia, Finland, Karelia region, Sweden. They went to Bohuslän, a region in southwestern Sweden. They wanted to study the petroglyphs and figure out the possible spiritualism these people were into thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. They went to Italy, did all that. But the craziest thing, of course, was the human human experiments. So again, managed by Wolfram Sievers, the big hero, it appears, of Alexander Dugin. And so they had this obsession with human skulls. So they measured human skulls, something like we've seen from the Aztec Empire or other empires from the Americas or Mesoamerica or South America. So they create this huge collection of skulls. And so here I have this book. This is from Ernst Klee. It's called Auschwitz, die NS-Medizin und ihre Opfer. This is like a study of all these experiments that were done. So they used up humans like guinea pigs, and they were transplanting stuff on humans. So they were putting things from one human onto another human, and checked if this was going to work as intended. Now, I cannot mention many details because this would not be acceptable by YouTube's standards. But they also tested diseases, of course, tuberculosis, poison ammunition. They had a strangest...
They were looking for weapons, or what? How was it related to the occult?
Well, this is the infrastructure. When you have this infrastructure, you could justify it. To the, well, in terms of budget, you can say we're doing real stuff here. We're checking out what the soldiers can endure and what we can expect for the soldiers. This is what got them the funding and the money. But the whole thing was run by these occultists. And they had their playground, and they could use some of that infrastructure and they could use some of that funding for occult experiments. Now, when you read between the lines, especially of this book here, you start to notice that a lot of these crazy experiments, a number of these experiments, made no real medical sense at all. So that leaves us with other reasons for it. So then they could hide some of this occult research, this occult experimentation, among war-related research. So they were testing on all kinds of diseases. They were testing on all kinds of foods or diets for the soldiers, or potentially diets for the soldiers. They had all kinds of chemicals at their disposal, from IG Farben, the industrial conglomerate, and it's extremely morbid. I mean, it's extremely morbid, and the whole purpose of this was to get to the next level for the German race, or the Aryan German race, right? So this is kind of the idol, one of the idols of Alexander Dugin, and we know that the Russians were also interested. The Soviets were interested in the occult, and they could copy some of these experiments. They could copy some of these experiments and also try to connect to previous times. To get the upper edge in terms of warfare, in terms of becoming more than humans. And you can check out all these people that were involved here in the Ahnenerbe, like Walter Wüst. Let me just put this guy up here. So this man, had studied Indology and comparative religion, anthropological geography, and racial distribution and migration in Munich. So, and he became fascinated with these ancient Indian texts, or Persian text, and basically these old mystery cults that they had. He was kind of late in joining the Nazi party, and of course he joined this crazy organization, the Ahnenerbe. He joined Wolfram Sievers, and he joined, of course, Heinrich Himmler. So they were into rune magic, sexual experimentation, sexual knowledge, word magic.
What is rune magic?
Well, the ancient runes. I mean, this is sort of like the holiest of holy for the Germanics. The ancient symbols which they had, and by invoking them today or at any time, you could sort of access some of the magic and access some of the powers. So this is when a symbol has magic power. This is like very common in magic, in the occult. Specific symbols, a very specific manual, and also the incantations, the words themselves. That all had magic to them. So these linguists were involved in.
Can you explain how that's related to the symbols are related to entities? Is that how they contact entities?
Oh yes, that's the whole purpose. This is how we connect. This is what and everything. Well, according to these Germanic cults, everything sort of had a soul. Everything was alive. So this is why they worship these stones or these rock formations. They worship the lakes. They worship the trees. This was like,
is that pantheism?
well, it's
God
like
is in everything.
It's like the obvious. I mean, it's like the obvious thing. I mean, what else were they going to feel magical about? And this was what surrounded them. And it seemed. I mean, if you've been to Germany or what, if you've been to Germany or some of these places, or in Northern Europe, yeah, there's like it seems impressive at times. It seems magical or romantic at times. I mean, it captures the imagination, but it's a whole different ball game if you come up with these rule books. If you come up with these rule books and say, if we follow this manual down to the last bit and we perfect these manuals, then we can have magic powers, and we can.
And of course, the problem is that so many people in Germany and other countries that want to believe this kind of thing. They don't want to accept that these people were criminals, that they were murdering people, right? They just don't want to believe that.
Yeah, but at the same time, they want to believe in power. They want to cling to that idea that there was this movement and it was so powerful, because at the end of the day, to many people who are still stuck in this old peasant mindset, they are fascinated by power first and foremost. This is what gets them. So they may say on the surface, "Oh, I don't believe the Germans did this, that, or the other." Just like people would say, "Oh, I don't believe the Soviet Union did this, that, and the other." But these things happened, and people are fascinated by power, or they are guided, at least. They let themselves be guided by power. They let themselves get controlled by power, and so this is like when people play fast and loose with reality and logic, when they say one thing but they believe something that's completely contradictory. Just like when they say, or some people in the extreme right wing, even today, or even in the US, when they say, "Oh, well, they claim the Nazis didn't do all that," but then in the next breath they insinuate that now we should do even more. We should do everything. We should just annihilate everything that's in our way, or do whatever it takes. And that's exactly the mentality. This is whatever it takes. And it's like when Tucker Carlson talks about demons now, is it just to impress people, to appear more special? And then he visits Russia, and he gets to be the only guy now, a few years ago, who gets to interview Vladimir Putin. And he's the one who's close to Alexander Dugin. And Dugin talks about magic all the time. I mean, I remember in the first leg of the first Trump administration, there was like this trend wave, the new right wing, where they had this idea of right wing chaos magic. They had this, all kinds of activists were getting into this internet cult, which combined right wing politics with magic. So just like with the runes and with these incantations, they thought that certain memes had magical qualities, or certain names and phrases. So by repeating the stuff on the web and amplifying it, they were trying to do collective magic. And there's actual experts who wrote about this at the time, and people better take this seriously. There is a wide variety of right-wingers today, worldwide, or extreme right-wingers today. Extreme right-wingers today who are into psychedelics, and they use that to attract new members, and they use that to intensify their beliefs, political, but also spiritual. So this is what other organizations have done as well. The use of psychedelics to make people experience what the Germanics had experienced, or what later Germans had experienced. When you see these stone formations, and the forests, and the fog, and the mist, and the light, and the moonlight, and you hear the animals in the night, and you can touch things. You can touch the grass and the moss, and it's very. And when you are on psychedelics, and this is tied into an occult framework, an occult ritual, this can be extremely, extremely powerful. This is what motivates people, and this is what Alexander Dugin is trying to use, and this is what the Russians are trying to use. But if you want to make an omelet, they all thought, these people, if you want to make an omelet, you gotta break some eggs. And man, did they break a lot of eggs. Man, I can't quote anything from this book. This is like the worst horror movie. No, I guess I can't quote any of the stuff in detail without violating YouTube policies. Yeah, so once you have all the files, because the Germans, we love order, we love, having bureaucracy and files. Once you have all this stuff listed, they had the infrastructure, they could do whatever they want, and it's all run by occultists. What's the next step? What's the next step for a druidic, Germanic cult? You experiment on humans in a spiritual way.
There's human sacrifice. You know, when you're dealing with entities, and we've touched on this before, you have this thing where the entities ultimately have some kind of thirst for blood, like we saw in the case of ancient Mexico, the Aztecs. Just before the arrival of the Spaniards, you've got the Phoenicians, the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians. The one of the dynasties, the Shang dynasty in China. You have ritual human sacrifice. I think the Druids practiced it too, didn't they? Ritual human. They had some of that. I know the ancient Scandinavians. There's an ancient holy site in Sweden where they would sacrifice, I believe it was 10 people every year at the summer solstice. So this has gone through many pagan cults, and so it's not surprising in some of these experiments they were maybe trying to create psychic energy by torturing or murdering people. Is that possible?
What do you mean specifically?
Well, I think part of the idea is when you read Crowley's Magic, when he talks about blood sacrifice, and you're harnessing the energy of the victim, and the ideal victim is like a 5-year-old boy who's beautiful and highly intelligent, which he says in the book. Yeah. He says this in the book, and but then he talks about mass human sacrifice to create an enormous amount of psychic energy that could be harvested by a magician or a group of magicians. And this always makes me wonder, when you have an organization like the SS that is doing the Holocaust, that's killing people almost like in a factory sense. You know,
harvesting
they're shipping
energy.
them to these gassing stations. Yeah. They're using fake showers. They're using Zyklon B, delousing agent to kill people. When you put all that together, is it a project? Is there some kind of sacrificing? Is there some kind of harvesting of psychic energy or energy vampirism going on with this? I don't know. It's just a thought that occurs to me because it's so senseless. The violence, the killing is so senseless. You know, or was it the case that Hitler had all these Jews and he thought the Jews controlled this is a thought I have. He thought the Jews controlled America and Britain in the West, and he had the Jews as hostages in the camps. And then he thought in 1942, because the Holocaust, the mass killing, didn't start until 42, after the Wannsee Conference, did he think that, now I have the hostages, and now I'm going to start killing the hostages, so they have to make peace with me now, right? I mean, was this going through his head?
Yeah, we're always looking. Professionals will always look for motive, opportunity, and intent.
Yeah. What was going through these people's minds when they murdered all these people? Yeah. I mean, it's just, and then the occultism of Himmler. It's also so bizarre. I don't think we can have anything in modern history. I mean, the Soviet Gulag, they worked people to death by underfeeding them. They purposely worked them to death.
Yeah,
but they didn't have a factory system for murder. It's just so.
There are indications that that the anti-Semitism was tied to a fundamental perceived difference between different types of magic. This is something that you can find when you really get into this anti-Semitic literature or anti-Semitic / occult literature that was going around even before the Nazis even existed, because this goes back a couple of generations further on German soil. So there's this idea that Mesopotamian magic was the enemy. So anything that came from these very old empires or some of these very old empires, this was considered bad magic or destructive
Do you realize there's
magic.
some people who think the Etruscan magic, which was very influential on the Romans, ultimately came from Mesopotamia, and that the
Yeah,
Etruscans
I mean
might have
they
been a Mesopotamian group that
the Mesopotamians
migrated to Italy?
they did a lot of things first. You know, when we talk about significant empires, but for the Nazis, there was this huge disconnect between Mesopotamian specific Mesopotamian magic and sort of the other side of magic, which was more like the Nordic, the Nordic, partially the Roman and the Greek. They still counted the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire to be worthy. They still had sympathies for that, but anything further, you know, to the east, the
And
desert.
yet, they're I mean, the Nazis are basically, I mean, from what I've heard, they're basically calling on entities in their
Yeah,
experiments. They're calling on
yeah.
demonic entities. So what's the difference? I don't
Yeah, so
understand.
they understood that the well, in their twisted sense of or distorted sense of history, they thought that Jewish people by their blood, by their very attributes, that these Jewish people, they sort of harnessed this ancient Mesopotamian magic, this dark magic, which was like a competitor to the Nordic Germanic magic. So they wanted to be completely separate and annihilate the competition. So they would think that if no Jew was left, nobody, or that, and then of course they could destroy other ethnic groups as well, like the Slavs, and just move from place to place and destroy these people, so that the only magic left would be this Germanic, this Germanic Nazi magic. Because if you think about doing rituals and sacrificing people, they thought that the Nazis thought that other groups in the world were doing their own magic. So in that sense, if you have a purpose with your magic, but the competition is going against your work with you know the competition is doing their magic against your magic, you need to kill the competition. You need to literally murder them so they can't do their magic and they can't spread their blood, you know, and bring forth new possible magicians, right?
So
This
it's
is
a
like a
genocidal solution. So it's the final solution.
yeah, in more ways than one. I mean, the final solution
The
has
the end
many different
logos.
meanings, but it also had a spiritual meaning. The final solution for this spiritual mess that the Nazis perceived the world to be in. Very 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 dangerous topic, and nowadays of course the Russians try to play that card a lot, because white people in Europe, well, people that look like, you know, most people here in Europe, these white guys or white people in Europe, in the United States, a lot of white people are miserable. You know, they suffer from the taxes and the taxes and just general decay. A lot of this decay actually goes back to Russian influence or Chinese influence and this communist espionage and communist subversion. But the Russians will not admit to that. The Russians will say, "We have the answer to your problems." Because that's how espionage works. They always want to find out what the target audience is missing, what they actually want.
Well,
So
they added the secret sauce to feminism to make it toxic, and they
yeah,
added the secret sauce to the homosexual movement to make it toxic, and they added the secret sauce to the workers' movement to make it toxic. So they just basically made everything. They
and then
had
yeah,
an inversion. You know, there is a magic in the Bolsheviks in that everything the Bolsheviks did was an inversion. You're
mm,
inverting rank order. You're putting the people who were in the social order at the lowest. Now they're the bosses, right? You got the lumpen proletariat criminals like Stalin at the top, and you're taking the people who used to be at the top, and you're basically putting them in the gulag, making them slave labor. So you're inverting the social order. It's an inversion, and feminism also involves this inversion. And so you make who were the outcasts of society, you put them on top, you make them into heroes, you make them into martyrs. And so
Yeah.
this inversion is a practice of communists. They do it in practice, and I think it's conscious. But this is a magic. This actually has symbolism. This
Yeah.
magically is a
And
referent to inversion.
isn't it interesting how the communist subversion has these different facets, these different faces, and they teach, well, or adapt different elements of magic and then bring those elements of magic to the target audiences, but it's done in a way so that different groups are not compatible with each other anymore. So the Nazis and modern strains, or what some of these people preach nowadays, they make normal things, they declare normal things to have magic powers, to have a family, your homeland, the countryside, the nature of just going out into nature, the very rock and soil where you live. The Nazis called it blood and soil, or Blut und Boden. So they would give magic meaning to everyday normal things, right? And say this is the good magic. This is where we draw our power from. But then the leftists were told to the leftists, the leftist target audience was told to do a different kind of magic. The left wants to destroy these things, which the right considers magical, right? Destroy the family.
Those three words in English: subversion, inversion, perversion. It seems that
so destroy the family, destroy the
Yeah.
family, weaken men, distort just gender attributes, tell people not to have kids or not to have traditional families, not engage in anything that could tie you to nature and your homeland.
Feminism is now associated not with motherhood but abortion,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the opposite of
Yeah.
motherhood, right? It's the total denial of
Yeah,
motherhood.
abortion becomes a ritual. Abortion becomes almost a power ritual. And if you've had an abortion or several abortions, you can feel powerful because you've done your own magic against the right
Yeah, it used to
wingers'
be
magic.
you were a heroic woman if you had 10 kids, and now if
Yeah,
you've aborted 10, what are
yeah.
you, an abortion
And
hero now?
it's this anything goes mentality. So you basically have to go full Satanist to win. That's what different groups are told. So every group is guided towards essentially the same kind of Satanism. They all think they have their own magic and their own system, but it's only one. There's only one. It's always the same one. And these different groups, they end up in the same. It's like a big funnel. It's like this huge funnel. They go in from different places, but they end up all in the same place. And the Russians want to control that. Now, to tie into this, when we talk about weird people influencing, weird Russians influencing Americans, and these Americans then influencing policymakers, presidents. When we have these Silicon Valley, or they still call it Silicon Valley, these tech bros, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, supposedly they're microdosing, or they're using therapeutical substances that are associated with magic. They're visiting special parties. Peter Thiel is from Germany, and they try to influence the Trump administrations, or generally the government. So again and again and again, we have this problem in America that there's these influences from people with a European background or a Russian background, and these people that came to America 1 generation ago, 2 generations ago, sometimes 3 generations ago, these Europeans, they couldn't really be properly background checked. And when they established themselves in the US, they could exert influence all kinds of influence, right? Mm-hmm. And so now when we have this Iran war going on, influencers who love Dugin are talking about Jewish occultism and like the Nazis. They see that's the parallel. These Dugin, these friends of Dugin, these influencers, these friends of Dugin, it sounds to me like the same spiritual war that the Nazis were trying to fight. See, when people talk on the internet, oh, Jews have this dark magic. Jewish people, like Chabad or the Hasidim, these Jewish people have this dark magic, and we need our own special magic to win this magical war, the spiritual war, right? It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing by talking about all this Jewish stuff. But when these influencers, they can point at different people that really exist. They point at Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. They can point at other, let's say, Jewish individuals or people with a Jewish background that had high positions in the two Trump administrations. They could point at Roy Cohn. They can point at all kinds of things to construct that Nazi narrative, or reconstruct that Nazi narrative of a Jewish world conspiracy dominating everything, and it's a spiritual war, and we need our Satanism or our magic to fight their magic. But if you look deeper into these characters, like Jeffrey Epstein or a Roy Cohn or whatever, we actually understand what a monumental task we have at hand, especially for Americans. We need a whole new dimension of counterintelligence, because you can only have America and you can only have liberty and you can only have independence if you understand this massive multi-generational espionage threat that came from Europe, Eastern Europe, and Russia. It came to the US. All that craziness that people wanted to get away from, physically get away from, go to America, and spiritually get away from, and socially get away from, all that craziness crept back into the United States through migrants and sleeper agents, sometimes multi-generational sleeper agents. So instead of listening to the Tucker Carlsons and Candace Owens, I did a comparison between Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump in terms of their contacts who had migrant backgrounds. Now, Reagan was a very different man than Donald Trump. They're not the same guys, but there are parallels, right? There's different networks that wanted to control a president like Reagan, or wanted to influence a president like Donald Trump. And so, you are old enough, Jeff, to actually remember Reagan, correct?
Yes. I'm old enough to remember Jack Kennedy as president.
Yeah, so
I was 5 years old. I was 5 years old when he was assassinated, and I remember I was mesmerized watching his funeral on TV.
Yeah, but you're like 20. You're like what, 20 years older than I am, and I was born in 1984. So I was a little kid, and I was entering school in 1990 when the Soviet Union was officially done. Right.
I was in 1984. I was 26 years old. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the Marine Corps Reserve when the revolution happened in Iran, and I thought we were all going to be called up to go fight over there because they took our hostages.
Yeah. So a lot of people,
kind of surprised that I wasn't.
A lot of people who are younger than you are, they never experienced Reagan or that area of the Cold War. They never really saw it, experienced it, lived it as an adult. So because they were conscious later, let's say 1990 or the 90s, they never bothered to actually learn about the Reagan era and to learn about the Soviet Union, because they thought it's over. Why should I learn anything about it? Why should I get into the moles, the super moles, the spies, the
And the
subversion.
Cold War and the spies and everything was going on years, before I was born. That started after World War II, and I was born, 13 years after World War II ended, and it had been going on for more than a decade
Yeah,
when I was born. So I remember being shocked as a little boy, seeing a picture of the Soviet Union and seeing how much bigger it was in the United States, being kind of afraid. Does that mean they're more powerful than we are?
yeah.
I
And so the thing is, when we talk about Soviet subversion and Soviet espionage, there's a whole has a bigger dimension than what people really understand. Especially because of Europe, because the Soviet Union officially, in terms of its territory, the Soviet Union didn't extend to Western Europe, right? But they had espionage all over, espionage deeply embedded in Western Europe. And then, of course, when the Soviet Union was forming, a lot of people were fleeing west. They were getting out of Poland, or they were getting out of the Baltics, and they were, getting into West Germany and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of espionage came with that. And so then you get all these different people, German background, went to the United States, could be a spy. Polish background or Polish Jewish background, went to the United States, could be a total spy. Baltics, went to the United States, could be a spy, could be sleeper agents, especially when these characters are drawn to power. They magically have success in the US, and then they try to influence all kinds of things and interconnect with other very problematic networks. Sometimes people that sound pretty much like Jeffrey Epstein's seemed like, right? This weirdo, some very weird and dark intersections. So on its face, or just on a superficial level, there are similarities between Reagan and Trump. So Reagan had worked in the entertainment industry, so did Trump. Reagan was close to the Democrats for a long time before making a turn to the right. Same with Trump, kinda. Both had many strange, very close contacts to people with an Eastern European and Russian background. But both followed a strong foreign policy as presidents. That's true as well. So almost all observers, including the conspiracy cranks, didn't truly know what to make of these two guys. So their environments were heavily influenced by people whose history is partially buried in the chaos of Europe, the late Russian Tsarist Empire, and the USSR. So Eurasian territory, from Lisbon, Portugal to Vladivostok, has always been a den of spies, and untangling this mess is the only way to have freedom and independence in places like the US. So obviously Americans really don't like having America explained to them by foreigners. It's regarded as highly insulting, of course. Now, I'm a German with family in North Carolina and the New Jersey area. My cousin worked for the fire department of New York during 9/11. And instead of glorifying messy, secretive European countries and patronizing US citizens, I would rather offer assistance in counterintelligence. Now, President Donald Trump's own grandfather was born in Bavaria, Germany. Now, Donald is in trouble for his past socializing with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, whose parents were Jews from Poland and Lithuania. Now, the emphasis is on Polish and Lithuanian. The Jewish factor is a side note. Jews and non-Jews in Europe and Russia were under control by different empires, which has significant
what part of Poland was Jeffrey Epstein? So Lithuania had been part of the Soviet Union starting in 1940. When did they immigrate? When did his parents immigrate?
Well, one of these days I'll do a detailed breakdown of his what we can tell about his parents.
He was born in. He was just a couple of years older than me. I think he was born in 1955, 56.
Yeah. And how do you background check? How do you background check his parents? I mean, how does the United States at the time back then? Now you have different capabilities, but back then, how do you background check the parents of Jeffrey Epstein? Oh, we're from Poland. Oh, we're from Lithuania. What area exactly and what time frame? Who was in control of Poland at the time, and who was in control of
Yeah.
Lithuania at the time? And also, the Soviets kind of inherited, certain operations from the Tsarist Empire. Because why would you cancel everything that was going on? When you capture a state, when you capture an apparatus, why stop certain operations in foreign countries? You can just continue them. So it's difficult. How do you background check Jeffrey Epstein's parents? So Jews and non-Jews in Europe and Russia were under control by different empires, which had significant espionage capabilities. So it's very complicated to figure out.
I guess it was his grandparents that immigrated to the United States, not his parents.
Let me just check this real quick.
Yeah, it wasn't his parents. So they came they would have come if it was his grandparents, and they would have come before World War I, I would guess. And they were probably part of the persecuted, that would have been the Russian Empire. Poland was under the Russian Empire, Lithuanian was. And this is in the Western Pale of Settlement, you had a lot of Jews, and you had the Black Hundreds, and you had pogroms against the Jews. This is why a lot of East European Jews immigrated to the United States, because they were being persecuted.
It says Lithuanian Jewish
in Russia. Yeah.
And Polish Jewish ancestry had married in 1952. Okay, but again, how do you background check the Epstein family? How do you do that? Do you have access to Lithuanian records and Polish records? I think not. And Jeffrey, as we know, became very influential and was attached to many, many different people. So many additional powerful individuals in the Trump administrations and in his business and private circles have European roots like this. So it's not a long drive for me if I wanted to visit Poland or Lithuania in the Baltics. It's actually pretty close.
Well, Trump himself has connections. His business has connections to people that worked for or are related to Mogilev, the brainy Don from Minsk. There's these Russian mafia connections to the Trump, where they are buying and selling real estate. This is where money laundering takes place from mafias, is through real estate transactions. And it isn't just Trump's company. This has been common in a lot of large real estate companies.
Yeah. So how do you background check anybody? So it's like due to some arrests over the last years in TV shows, more Americans have become familiar with the phenomenon of the sleeper agents. So this is when a government recruits and trains individuals in spycraft, gives them false identities, and has them migrate from place to place until they reach the target country. So each step in the migration chain has a certain time span to make the lives of the sleepers seem believable. Fake marriages are arranged, and these couples have real children who will eventually be recruited by their own parents. Now, record keeping in Europe was often sketchy in the past. Falsifying papers and stealing the identities of people who prematurely died was easy. And everyone wanted to get a piece of America. So this is very important to understand. So these were different forces different forces in Russia, in various stages of Russia. Russian circles, they wanted to have a piece of America. They wanted to infiltrate America. Other places in Europe, European powerful groups, they also wanted a piece of America. They wanted to infiltrate the United States. And let's not forget some of these Germanic or post-Roman Germanic aristocrats, specific aristocrats. They wanted to get America back because they wouldn't let this go, with the independence and the formation of the United States of America. Because, some people may actually remember some of these mercenaries that fought in the Revolutionary War. They were from Hessen, right? The
Yeah, they were the ones Washington when he crossed the Delaware and attacked him right around Christmas time. He surrendered a bunch of Hessians.
Yeah, because it was a numbers game, and so if you could get another 10,000 troops on short notice, that could actually change the course of the war. And so, the British Empire was busy, all over the world with the French and all these competitors, and so they could recruit 10,000 people. 15,000 people. They could recruit such numbers on short notice from places like Hessen in Germany. Now, the aristocratic House of Hessen is extremely powerful, even though almost nobody today knows about them, knows anything about history, and they don't know how they tied into the British Empire or Denmark or even the czars in the last, let's say, the last couple of czars were in Russia. The emperors, emperors of Russia.
Queen Victoria's children married. Into
they were very
the
much tied.
Of Germany, Russia, and Denmark.
Very much tied into this House of Hessen. So you have also these German or Germanic sort of these Germanic power groups that also wanted America back. They wouldn't let this go. They wanted to infiltrate the United States and have influence over the United States, at least. So to, let's say, change policy and say, well, the U.S. should really trade more with Britain, or, America should do this about the French, America should do that about the French. So this is kind of like today's debate when people say, why is America going to war with Iran? Is somebody influencing America to do this? Is it the Jewish conspiracy? Is it blah, blah, blah? Was it Jeffrey Epstein? Was it whatever? So same discussion we need to have about the past, but a professional discussion. All groups wanted to infiltrate the U.S., and they sent their people to America. Now, so when you have a career like Reagan's, a big career usually starts with a significant university. And as we know, universities are a place where a lot of espionage really happens and a lot of influence is exerted. Because if you join certain universities and certain fraternities, you're supposed to be a member for life. You become a member of this secretive or selective organization, a member for life. And when you leave college, you get job opportunities provided by other members of this group or a network of these fraternities. And so what about foreign influence on these structures? What about European influence? European influence on or a European manipulation of American universities. Now, Ronald Reagan earned a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Sociology from Eureka College in 1932. Eureka's alumni list includes dozens of college and university presidents, several governors and members of Congress, and most famously Reagan himself, future 40th president of the United States. While at Eureka, Reagan joined the fraternity Tau Kappa Epsilon, a detail that is easy to overlook. The member badge looked like Nazi SS insignia or the iconography of the Yale Secret Society Skull and Bones. Now I have the official picture here. This creepy badge, with the skull and crossbones, that's the membership badge of Tau Kappa Epsilon. And they even had a coat of arms comparable to European aristocracy. There's also another skull over there. That's very European, this kind of stuff, especially when you just copy it like this. And so the original name of this fraternity, the original name was Knights of Classic Lore. Since when do we have actual knights in America? I thought they were done with this crap. They were done with this...
Oh, we have lots of knights. The Ku Klux Klan were knights.
Yeah, the Grand Knights of the... Yeah. So it's like it's
Yeah.
I mean it's a plaything for some people, to use these names, but you
But
gotta.
these fraternities are formed by kids, by college kids who get a little smattering of learning, and they start to grab these symbols and make these things for themselves, right? I mean,
Well,
that's who
if
makes fraternities.
if yeah, it has a childish element to it, but if presidents come out of it, if senators and governors come out of it, and there's like you need to look at what you're getting. That's what I'm saying, because when you're young and when you're powerful, you have a powerful future ahead of you. You become a bit reckless, and this is something that professional organizations have used for a long time, and the Europeans were experts at that. We've had so many serious organizations that looked exactly like this. But we
Compromise kids when they're young. Is that the idea?
Well, I mean, the Bavarian Illuminati was a was an organization like this. It was based on the University of Ingolstadt. I actually went to the sister college in Eichstätt, but they were always hiding themselves behind something. They had a facade. It was something either benign facade or a slight enlightenment facade, but they were doing something completely different underneath.
I mean, you had what was it? You had Goethe's. Goethe was in the Illuminati. You also had the father of the most famous Austrian statesman.
What, the Metternich guy or the other ones?
Metternich's father was in the Illuminati.
Well, and also, yeah,
I
and
don't
also
think he
the
was, and of course that family they were very pro English. They were Anglophiles. The
yeah, and some
Metternichs.
some of them. I mean,
Um,
some of these organizations, they captured they got new members because they presented themselves as rebellious. They would have wild parties, and really wild parties, and sometimes like the Hellfire Club in Europe. Like the Hellfire Club, they would be more serious in their partying. So this is when it gets a bit sketchy in terms of having fun. Um, and it was the allure of power and being reckless when you're young. I mean, this fraternity that Reagan went to, they had a slew of scandals related to hazing and extreme drinking. Some people died
well,
from.
he went there. He went to school there. What in the late 1920s or in the early
He
30s?
he he got his degree in 1932.
So he would have gone there from 1928 to 32. It's usually a 4-year deal in American
Yeah, and let's not
colleges.
forget that. Let's not forget the Germans. They also had a lot of these. The Germans had a lot of these
Or
extreme right wing.
Skull and Bones at Yale originated in Germany.
Yeah,
Skull and
I mean
Bones
the
actually
the Nazi
originated in
movement,
Germany.
the whole Nazi movement was built on these earlier organizations, which were into occult practices, or they had all kinds of organizations tied to universities as well, and they would have lodges and stuff. So
But in a way, it's a social club. In a way, you could say these fraternities are really social clubs, and their members of each
exactly,
class
exactly.
graduate.
But
And look,
spies like to hide in all kinds of organizations. I mean, it's not just flashy organizations. It's not just like trying to embed espionage in the Masons or Skull and Bones. You can embed espionage into anything. I mean,
but
usually the
how
more.
many American universities have this Phi Delta Theta? I mean, how big is it? Is it how many at how many campuses is it at?
Oh, it's like
So if
it's
you
like they have. I think they have like. I mean, there's different subtypes of these or different chapters of these,
So
and they
when
form.
people say that there's all these governors and stuff and politicians who come out of this, if you've got half the colleges in America have this as one of their fraternities, you're going to get a lot of politicians.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it's
know,
like they have usually they have when they count living members. I mean, it's not like everybody becomes president who's in one of these groups, but when over the years when people go through these become members, and they go on afterwards, they have a certain significant number of living members that try to connect to each other. But as always, we need to be watchful when it comes to espionage, especially espionage that comes from Europe. And this would have been a prime target. I mean, any student organization like this would have been a prime target for European spying, Eastern European spying, and Russian spying. I mean, I talked about in a previous episode about the exiled, the exiled Romanovs and all kinds of exiled exiled Russian aristocrats who would go to Europe, who would go to the US, and they would connect with military people, high-ranking US military officers and politicians, and they would influence these Americans and push the fake protocols of Zion on them. They would just try to influence them so hard and move them towards a more fascist view. There's all kinds of influence, all kinds of influence operations going on.
I mean, to kind of maybe quell the idea that that this Phi Delta Theta is a major conspiratorial group. It is a major international fraternity with over 195 active chapters and emerging chapters across the United States and Canada. And its total initiated members today are over 312,000 people.
Exactly.
And it was founded in 1848. The year of the Communist Manifesto, the year of the revolutions, the year of revolutions sweeping Europe.
Yeah. And if you target that, if you target an organization like this, you would have a pre-selection of people who are going to have interesting jobs and are going to have access to interesting
with thousands
information.
Of politicians, with thousands of politicians,
because these people will go on. These people in those fraternities, they will go on to have interesting jobs, have access to sensitive information. They will have access to interesting people. So, of course, this is like a hunting ground, and we've seen this in Europe all over the place. I mean, sometimes we actually get a police crackdown, like on the Bavarian Illuminati, and we get some internal documents. But usually, that is not the case. So obviously, it's a process.
It's at 305 colleges. This particular fraternities at 305 colleges. So you would not be surprised. I mean, nobody here can even. Nobody listening to me right now can name 305 colleges in Canada and the United States.
Yeah,
that's a lot of names.
So the mythological ideal or patron of Tau Kappa Epsilon is Apollo, an important and complex Olympian deity in Greek and Roman mythology. Tau Kappa Epsilon is also affiliated with the German fraternity system known as the Corps of the Weinheimer Senioren Convent. That is the second oldest German student society association, founded in Frankfurt, Hessen. Again, Hessen, center of one of the most powerful aristocratic dynasties in history, with members ruling the British Empire as far as Russia. So, of course, the rulers of Hessen, they wanted America back, obviously. So there's one espionage risk here out of many. The House of Hessen had recruited the Rothschild family for a banking front organization, so to say. And every conspiracy buff and almost all Muslims today believe the Rothschilds took over the world. Almost nobody today knows about the House of Hessen, which had recruited the Rothschilds. And so, besides Reagan, other widely recognized political figures from this fraternity include former West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd, longest-serving member in the history of the United States Congress back then, former Arkansas governor and Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, CEOs like Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Mark Benioff of Salesforce, and Steve Forbes of Forbes magazine. And so, so then after graduation, when he had this membership, this was his new status. He had a network now. After graduation, Reagan built a career as a sports broadcaster, developing the voice, the timing, the performance that would later become part of his political identity. So the ability to sound spontaneous while working from a mental script, improvisation inside a prepared structure. So then he got into Hollywood. A screen test led to a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers, and he arrived in Hollywood in 1937. So the studio era was a tightly controlled ecosystem. A key figure in the transformation of Hollywood power, and also a key figure in the career of Reagan, in the career of Ronald Reagan, was Lew Wasserman. Lew Wasserman, widely described as one of the most influential deal makers in the industry, the last of the legendary movie moguls, arguably the most powerful Hollywood figure in the decades after World War II. Wasserman renegotiated Reagan's contract in ways that opened additional opportunities. And Wasserman was also a major political fundraiser and an influential player in Democratic Party circles, not Republican, Democratic Party circles, illustrating how entertainment, money, and politics often share overlapping networks. Wasserman was born to a Jewish family in Cleveland, Ohio, the son of Isaac Wasserman and Minnie Chernick, both immigrants from Russia. Wasserman's close friend was Jack Valenti, son of Italian immigrants, again, Europe, represents another bridge between media and state power. Valenti served as a special assistant to President Lyndon B. Johnson, later became the longtime head of the Motion Picture Association of America. His background, combat service as a bomber pilot in World War II, decorated for valor and endurance, gave him credibility in both patriotic and political circles. And so the Warner Brothers, these were actual brothers. This was not just a name. So these brothers, they needed money to expand their operations. So we're talking about the Polish Jews. These were Polish Jews, Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack Warner. So those were the Warner Brothers in Hollywood, and they got their money. They got a lot of money from Goldman Sachs, the well-known bank. In 1924, Goldman Sachs arranged a major loan for the studio, a reminder that American entertainment power quickly became inseparable from American financial power. And Marcus Goldman, the firm's founder, was a German Jewish immigrant. A German Jewish immigrant who arrived in the United States in the mid-19th century. So he came from Germany. So individuals, and all these people, they all come from Europe. They all have this European background or Eastern European background or Russian background. Individuals in Europe, Jewish or not, had no meaningful power whatsoever. At best, they could get recruited by the aristocracies and perform tasks as ordered. So when you hear or read Jew from Poland or Jew from Germany or Jew from Lithuania, you don't automatically know whom you're dealing with, what network this person was potentially working for, or what level of insight this person actually possessed while performing tasks and missions for a handler. Reagan enlisted in the United States Army Reserve. He produced hundreds of training films, so that was his career. And then Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild. Now, this is Hollywood royalty, basically. If you have that position, you have power in Hollywood. And this was also the era of the subversives in Hollywood.
Yeah.
These were
the Screen
communists.
Actors Guild was basically a union for actors.
Yeah.
Is basically what it was.
And so they had the massive scandal of powerful people in Hollywood, very powerful people in Hollywood, having connections to the Communist Party, the Communist Party of the United States. And so there was counteractions against that. There were investigations. And a famous flashpoint was called the Hollywood 10. 10 left-leaning screenwriters and directors cited for contempt of Congress after refusing to answer questions before the House Un-American Activities Committee. So those 10 suspicious people were Alva Bessie, Herbert Bieberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. Some of these figures had Communist Party associations. Many were children of immigrants or came from immigrant communities, and several were Jewish. So all of this made background checks for possible communist cell activities really difficult. So Reagan played his role. He was supposed to, he was supposed to do his part in figuring out who was a communist. But then, this influence kept growing on Ronald Reagan. All these foreigners, all these Europeans that were in his life and in his career. Reagan's second wife, Nancy Reagan, had her own web of cultural connections. A striking detail sometimes mentioned in biographies is that the Russian-born actress Alla Nazimova was Nancy's godmother. Nazimova was renowned for her work in Ibsen. You mentioned that guy before, the Norwegian writer. For her work in Ibsen, Chekhov, and Turgenev. Became one of the highest paid actresses in the US, a star, and later gained renewed attention for avant-garde artistic influence and early queer cultural history. She created the Garden of Allah Hotel, a celebrity party refuge. So,
how curious.
Yeah, it sounds like the dark days of Hollywood, and maybe even it sounds a bit like what Epstein was doing. They were creating these closed off places, guarded communities where the selected few could party, and she was like the early star. This Alla Nazimova. She was like the early star of, for the gays and the queers and the lesbians. I think she was a lesbian or bisexual. And, she was Russian-born. I think she was even a star in Russia before she came to the U.S. And she got very, very, very close to Nancy Reagan, who was then who became the wife of the President of the United States. And so Reagan began his political life as a Democrat, admiring Franklin D. Roosevelt as a true hero. The Roosevelt family traces its roots to Claes Martensen van Rosenfeld, a Dutch immigrant who arrived in New Amsterdam in the mid-17th century, so that migrant background was a long time ago. But let's not forget, Holland was not a insignificant place in the past. The aristocratic house Orange-Nassau controlled Holland, invaded England, and took the crown. Reagan also worked with the AFL-CIO to oppose right-to-work laws aligning with mid-century labor liberalism. And over time, he shifted to the right, supporting the presidential campaigns of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. So was Reagan? I mean, it would have been brilliant if Reagan had actually been involved in some counterintelligence, and he was effectively spying against communists in Hollywood, in other places, the industry, Hollywood people trying to get into politics or influencing politics. So we can read this many different ways, and this is what makes it so interesting. And this is why people need to be cautious when you study a man like Ronald Reagan and his associations. Because it is what it is. Different groups from all over the world, they all wanted to get into America. They all wanted to get into the universities. And they all wanted to shape and control the future, moguls and presidents and judges and get into their private life, right? But the U.S. wasn't dumb either. They would the US would try to build its own system of whom to trust, and it's conceivable that the system failed against the Soviet Union. And who knows how many sleeper agents are out there. And uh, and then of course when we look at Donald Trump, we see the same kind of stuff. I mean, Donald Trump's first wife, Donald Trump's second wife, how communist Soviet intelligence was after his, I think it was his first wife. We got some new released files, I think, from former, I think it was STB intelligence service, Czechoslovakian service, was it? I kind of have a little trouble remembering this, but this was like the same thing. So Donald could have married American women. He marries somebody from the Eastern Bloc, and Soviet intelligence is trying to work the family of Donald's wife, Eastern European wife. Comes with a certain type of communist baggage, right? And then, of course, all these business dealings and all these connections, and Roy Cohn, the influential figure in Donald's life, Jewish background, but this usually means European background. We saw other billionaires or Jewish billionaires giving money to Donald's campaign. We saw the Mercer family, or the Mercers, Schillmans, and Rosenwalds, a couple of years ago, buying their way into the new right wing. This was like the Mercer family.
Donald Trump's son-in-law is Jewish, famously, and has been criticized for having him so much involved in negotiations and dealings in his administrations, particularly his first administration. So he has basically he's got Jewish people in his family. Trump does.
Yeah, and so this is like something that reminded me so much. Of Reagan. Now, at a time, very powerful in this whole Trump phenomenon, or this new right wing, alt right wing, whatever you want to call it, phenomenon. There was a lot of money coming in from the Mercer family. This was the hedge fund manager Robert Mercer. So they put in money for think tanks, and very influential with Donald Trump's campaign in 2016. So we have Robert Mercer, Rebecca Mercer, the daughter, and they put over $100 million in right-wing think tanks. They have the Mercer Family Foundation. And so this is gaining... I mean, this is not new information to the people that were on the Trump hype. I mean, this complete Trump hype. He's going to save us from everything. He's going to save us from the left. He's going to arrest the left deep state. He's going to save the world together with Putin and blah, 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 blah. So people, years ago, they would forgive Donald for his connections, his many connections to people with a European background. Now they're not so forgiving anymore, because the Russians now want to damage Donald Trump and his credibility. And so this is like another one of those families. And there was this casino guy. What was his name? This casino billionaire who put in a lot of money.
There's a number of those
into the Trump campaign. Yeah. So there's like people need to understand. Okay, there's so many influential individuals.
Weren't a lot of casinos in China?
Yeah. So
I remember his name was Stephen. I can't remember the last name now.
Steven. Yeah. So we'd have to look at these individuals and their backstory and their family backstory. How long has this particular family, the Mercers or others, how long have they been at this game? How long have they been influential in the US? How did they become successful? And it's like, it's the same with people that are completely not Jewish, like Peter Thiel. People got scared in recent days or the last week or so about the new generation of software like Palantir, that these corporations from Peter Thiel and others, for the police force, for the military, for the intelligence services, this whole AI thing. So who did a proper background of Peter Thiel, who was, I think, born in Germany? Was just a German guy. And, Elon Musk's grandfather, who was Elon Musk's grandfather, who was part of a Canadian organization, which was quite large at the time, and they were technocrats. They got into trouble with the Canadian government at some point. That's why Elon's grandfather went to South Africa and wrote conspiracy books, traditional conspiracy books, and so these technocrats in Canada, they wanted to change the system. They wanted a technocratic form of government, which sounded an awful lot like socialism. So it's like these bureaucrats, scientist bureaucrats, they control everything, and every person that gets born gets labeled and gets assigned resources, and your whole life is planned out for you. And resources are not allocated according to demand and supply and prices and negotiation, but it's decisions of these scientists. Even though scientists for hundreds of years have oftentimes been occultists. I mean, go ask the British with the Freemasonry and the sister organization, the Royal Society for Science. Especially, when they started out with the Royal Society and they were all kind of Rosicrucians, were heavily into the occult. So it's like both of these presidents, both of these men, they had these foreign influences on them. Many of them. I mean, we talked about Donald's father and how important it was for Donald's father to have a connection to the Wagner family. Wagner Jr., who was the mayor of New York City for 3 terms. And the older Wagner was also very powerful and also tied to politics. This was a German family. This was the Wagner family, right? And so it's like we need to understand that America needs a new dimension of counterintelligence. We need to figure out who these families are, all these families, who influenced whom, and who's pulling the strings. Because now, with the Iran war, people don't understand anything anymore. They were told Trump was going to change everything, even though he was one guy. And he didn't have this magical rebellious group behind him, which was claimed by Alex Jones and others. He was just a guy, and he was taught.
Yeah, they claimed it was sort of a secret. They implied often it was military guys, some clique within the military that wanted to save America, or within the intelligence community and so on. But this is, to counter the conspiracy, to be against the Rothschilds, etc. Yeah, this nonsense, this counter conspiracy. This is just, when you consider who Alex Jones has been financed by and who he's hired on his staff, Russian nationals and so on, and you see the rhetoric of him and of course these other people on the alt-right, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and of course the famous guy with the funny laugh. Help me out here.
Which one? There's like a weird laugh. It's like a distinctive
yeah, the weird laugh. What's his name? I can't think of his name.
I can't remember
He's
either.
so famous. He's a household word. He was on Fox News, Tucker Carlson. I don't know why I just couldn't think of his name for some reason. He went out of my head. But
this is like the most nervous laughter that you will hear. This is some. If an actor was doing this, on purpose, you would say, "Wow, that's a really good actor. That's impressive to play that kind of awkward."
Well, he plays this Boy Scout type character, and but he's turned out to be, it's all about the Israeli lobby, and Israel's behind the war. And I think we should remember that what really matters in the Middle East, whatever reasoning Trump used to get into the war, it's about oil, and it's about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. For Israel, it's about a nuclear weapon. We're worried about that too with the terrorism, because we're a target. It's death to America,
Yeah.
death to Israel.
And
And so
let's
we're
not
worried
forget
about
how
these people.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, let's not forget
we are.
how incompetent the Soviet army was. The Soviet army was in Afghanistan. They had a lot of problems because socialism doesn't work. Logistics, take a lot of organization and production, and they were not so good at that. So they had trouble in Afghanistan. So this is why they were hesitant to make a bigger. The Russians were hesitant. The Russians were hesitant to make a bigger military step into Iran because they figured the focus should be Europe. The real big prize was Western Europe. That's why this was always a hot topic for NATO, or especially the US and the Soviets. What's going to happen in Iran? Because if you're tied down in Iran, if the Russians are tied down in Iran, they can't really move against Europe so much. And I think there are many secret reasons now strategic reasons now why this war is taking place against Iran, because it's accepted that Russia has something big in store. They want to move against Europe in a big way in about 3 years. That's one current estimate. Others, they think it's going to be a lot quicker than that, but they think a big move is planned for 2029, a big move by Russia. But now this Iran situation is changing Russia's calculation, because they have to shift their resources too. They have to figure out, are we going to go into Europe that much, or should we use forces to stabilize, the Muslim world, the Muslim realm? Should we put tanks in there? Should we put people in there? Should we put money into this? So it changes the whole equation. And I think that even when the Bush admin was around, and I was never a fan of George W. Bush, I was never a fan of Rumsfeld or Cheney, or Condoleezza Rice, but I think even back then with the war against the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, I think there were also secret reasons that never saw the light of day. And it's like, it's not just what people thought it was. It's more complicated than what the propaganda said at the time. It's not just blood for oil and American imperialism and the elders of Zion and blah, blah, blah. There's always multiple reasons for why these things happen, and why the money is spent on these things. And so now it does change the equation. It does really change the equation when Iran is militarily weakened. There's all kinds of scheming. There was all kinds of scheming going on within Saudi Arabia and some of the other Arabic countries. And so there's like a potential problem for the Russians, and they tried their thing to influence the Arab world and to influence Islam, but it never really worked out to the degree, I think, that Moscow has planned. Because in Moscow's from Moscow's perspective, they wanted the Muslims to just rise up against the Europeans and fight big Satan America and blah blah blah. But that never fully really materialized. I mean, it's there. The KGB certainly spread the conspiracy lore among the Muslims. But it's a bad day for Moscow if Iran is decimated, or Iran's military production is decimated, Iran's troops or equipment is decimated. It does change the equation, don't you think? What's going to happen about Europe?
Well, Iran. The problem is that, and I'm not up to date on American capabilities because it's such a changing thing. And drone warfare is changing warfare. And of course, invading Iran, Iran is three times the size, more than three times the population of Iraq. So the invasion of Iraq was a huge preparation, a huge buildup when George W. Bush did it in 2003. And invading Iran now, a land invasion, is they just ruled it out. But never in the history of warfare have you collapsed a regime strictly from the air without any ground force. I mean, when Gaddafi was overthrown, there were rebel units. There was almost a civil war beginning in Libya. You don't have that in Iraq and I in Iran. Sorry, and I think the thing is they were thinking if they destroyed the leadership of the Iranian regime, and I think they killed or wounded like 48 to 60 leaders, uh, that the regime would crumble after the shock and awe. They would just fall apart and people would defect and run away. It didn't happen. If that regime was going to fall apart just from airstrikes, that would have happened more than a week ago. Now we're 2 weeks in, and they're dictating to us. They're saying that if we don't get out of the Middle East, they're going to keep that is the world's oil lifeline. They are going to keep their finger on that artery. We just started a war, and this is always bad to start a war because it means that the American people aren't really behind you. You can't sustain it. It's not like we got attacked at Pearl Harbor. It's we actually Pearl Harbored them, which is, a whole nother can of worms. They are our enemies, of course. This creates a moral dynamic that goes against us in terms of having staying power in the war. They have staying power in this war. They can close that waterway. They've proved they can do it. 2 oil tankers set on fire, sinking. Oil tankers won't go in and out. So this is 20% of the world's oil supply cut off. Catastrophic financial consequences, catastrophic for the economies, especially of our allies, and for the global oil price. Let me tell you, they're saying get out of the Middle East, and they gave us 30 days, and there's not going to be a negotiation. We're just cutting the oil off. We put them in the position of having more moral right to make this claim than we have, and we don't have the public support to sustain the war. We need to go in on the ground and conquer them to end, so they don't have this blackmail on us. But we've handed this to them. So strategically, we did it wrong. I was dismayed when we were preparing airstrikes without preparing to go on the ground. If you want to liberate the poor Iranian people, there's only 19, maybe 20% support of this regime, which is not sufficient to hold on under normal circumstances. But you started this war. You have nothing to go in on the ground to liberate these people. This is a problem.
But there was, this was in 1980, so I wasn't even around back then. That was 4 years before I was born. This is when the Iran-Iraq war began. This began with an Iraqi invasion of Iran. After 8 years of conflict, both countries accepted a ceasefire deal brokered by the United Nations. It became effective in August of 1988, this was a significant conflict. Now, at the beginning, each side had about only 200,000 soldiers, so that's not that much, both had significant casualties and losses. But it's like an example of Muslim states, Muslim states fighting each other. This is not out of the question. So I'm wondering if we're going to see a reorder of the entire region. And I'm wondering about the possible involvement of Saudi Arabia and Oman and some of these other places, because they've been buying a lot of weapons too. I've noticed that especially starting in 2015, when they were gearing up and spending a lot of money because they have a lot of money. And of course, Europe is always happy to oblige and sell the latest, coolest gear. And so I think this is not necessarily just going to be America's task, or this is not just going to be America's huge involvement, because America the U.S. has been training a lot for jungle fights against the Chinese, essentially, and naval and focusing on that part of the world, whereas the Europeans are now getting ready for traditional land warfare to a large degree. So getting the new tanks, building the new tanks, building the newest precision artillery, and all kinds of gear. I think that other places in the world will see different forces fighting. I think this is going to be different maybe than the U.S. The U.S. war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think there are more players involved now because the future it also concerns the future of the Saudis, the future of the United Arab Emirates, the future of many different places. It was concerning to Arab countries. It was concerning to Arab countries, certainly, that these Persians, Iranians, they're not Arabs, they have a Persian background, that these Persians were essentially, or became the tool of the Russian Federation. Because if you look at who built the Iranian military, who built the Iranian state, who built the Iranian intelligence apparatus, and this was all Russia. Same with the Palestinians. I mean, at some point, there has to be some kind of a bigger decision or a bigger outcome, not more of the same. Because for the longest time, the Russians ran the Palestinian groups and some other groups, always trying to build a war front against Israel. But I think most people out there, they don't understand all that. They just see and hear, oh, the big bad USA is bombing another country and Israel is attacking someone because Israel is secretly controlling the US. It's always the same blah, blah, blah without really understanding the dynamic of it all.
Well, this is an interesting thing. In terms of population, probably the country that is the most pro-Israel and pro-America, ironically, in the Middle East is Iran.
Really? That's because they want
yes, because the Iranian people want to be free, and most of them hate their regime, and they look to America and they look to Israel to liberate them. So, but they don't have any weapons. They've got 19-20% of their country is controlled by these Muslim fanatics who believe this particular, social liberation version of Islam, who are aligned with Moscow and Beijing. And they're basically, the country's just doing nothing but building weapons. And they don't care if they have enough water to drink, if they have enough food. They don't care about their people. They've turned their country into a giant weapon aimed at the U.S. and Israel. And of course, the people there, I mean, I went to school, when I first went to school before the Shah was overthrown, my college was filled with Iranian students from Iran. So there were, in every class I had, there were Iranian students. They spoke really good English. They were really bright. They were friendly. They were happy people. I thought, wow, I had no idea that Iran was such a modern, talk about their country, and got to be friends with some of them in my freshman year in fall of 1976. And it was why it was such a shock that these crazies took over this country. And the Persians traditionally have a kind of alliance, a warm relationship with the Jews going back to Cyrus the Great, the first great king of the Persian Empire. He liberated the Jews from their Babylonian captivity, by taking Babylon, famously. And that's all in the Bible. So there is this old interplay of relationships, and it's very tragic. But in order to defeat this group in Iran, you have to have the wherewithal. Now I think we're going to bring in troops in the ground, but the mistake is going to be it's going to be limited. You have to go all out and you have to take it. And you have to take it as quick as you can, and you have to organize so efficiently because you have to do this before the world economy crumbles. And it may start to crumble next month. So this is they have
I
really
think that
miscalculated. They should have been better prepared for this, and they
Yeah, but
weren't
I mean
prepared at all.
I think the difference between Iran, especially Iranians now. I mean, there's a huge difference between Iranians and the Afghanis from 20 years ago, or the Afghanis and the Iraqis 20 years ago, because this was like a broken countries. Afghanistan was a mess because all these empires wanted it for so long and nobody really could deal with it. But the broken down societies, very very primitive societies, local warlords, and just the most primitive version of Islam, and people having trouble reading anything besides the Quran, and not really access to culture or anything. But Iranians are different. So I think if Iranians are a lot more sophisticated, a lot more can be done with them. I don't. I mean, I don't think it would be strategically wise for America to send a lot of forces to Iran. Equipment, yes. Deliveries to positive forces, yes. But we need the Americans. We need the American military. The American military against China. The Europeans are supposed to defend themselves and take on Russia if they become more ambitious. And of course, Europe can be involved in some shape or form when it comes to Iran. Maybe when the regime in Iran, the regime loses parts of Iran, and then these parts of Iran, they can then connect with the US and connect with Europe. So maybe we're going to have two Irans right next to each other, like Germany was separated for decades. Maybe that's going to be a result of this. But yeah, maybe people will be somewhat surprised. Maybe it will make more sense in the future. Maybe not. But it's fun. It's crazy to see these influencers now going back into the same mode in which they were during the Bush admin. I mean, we saw Alex Jones crash out, disappointed in Trump, finally getting off the Trump train. Others are doing the same. And what do they have left? The only thing they can revert back to is traditional conspiracy lore and the Russian regime. And, the Dugin connections that they all have. Because the audience is disappointed, because the great salvation didn't come with Trump. He didn't have rebels behind him. I mean, I said this in 2016. I said, this is going to be a bit like Reagan, but more crazy in modern times. But the disappointment now is earth-shattering, with millions of Americans who bought into this influencer hype about Trump. And now you hear that all they talk now is Chabad and the Jewish thing and these Hasidic Jews and how they run it all, supposedly. And they're not saying it out loud that much, but it's Russia. It's Russia. That's all they got left. That's the only leader, that's the only Führer they have left is Vladimir Putin. Because where would they start to rebuild or actually build any political force? I mean, Tucker has all this audience. Alex Jones has all this audience. Candace Owens, all this audience. What do they do with that? Have they created political careers? Not really. Not really. Have they established?
Well, they're influencers. They're agents of influence. They're spreading, in the case of Candace Owens, anti-Semitism, basically. And of course, she would deny she's an anti-Semite. Of course, they love to do this. Just because I criticize Israel, I'm sorry, saying that the Jews control Washington is not just criticizing Israel. That's supporting a major tenet of anti-Semitic conspiracy lore that the Jews control all these things.
Yeah,
They
these
control the media,
European-looking
they control
guys.
Hollywood, they control
These,
Washington, they
yeah,
control everything. The Jews control the banking system, don't you know? This is
but
an
they all look like
exaggeration.
They mostly look like Europeans, or like some,
Yeah.
half German, bit Italian, bit Polish, little bit Middle Eastern, but they look like many Europeans. And to call them the
You can't
Jews,
really tell them apart. If you meet
you
a
call
Jewish
them,
person, you
yeah,
can't
you
tell
call
them
them
apart
the
from a
Jews.
European.
Go look at the
Yeah.
Rothschilds. Look at the photos of most of them. Look at the photos of the Warner Brothers. Look at the photos of some of these other guys that are lumped into this category, the Jews. Lots of individuals, lots of European ancestry, European background. They look European. And as with any European that came to the US, you don't know who he's working for. And the elders of Zion don't exist. So there's a whole slew of other countries that may control or may not control some of these migrants that came to America. It's like, it's an open investigation. Have at it. Everybody can try to figure out this guy and that woman and this guy and that guy and that guy who became powerful in the US and influenced politics or whatever, or influence, or work in the Hollywood system, and had these parties. I mean, I'm wondering how much of a party person Ronald Reagan was, when he was considered Hollywood royalty. And he was, friends with Lou Wasserman.
Well, I don't know that he was Hollywood royalty because he was a B movie
Screen Actors Guild. Yeah, but Screen Actors Guild.
But in terms of his fame and status, Reagan was a
he was
B
handsome.
movie actor.
He was a handsome man, and he was
nice
like,
looking, yes, but his career was not that fantastic as a
but he was like
most of his movies in the 30s and the 40s.
Yeah, but he was like the Screen Actors Guild, and he knew the guy who was running the Motion Picture Association of America. He knew the most powerful people in Hollywood, and maybe he partied a little too much. But that's life, I guess.
I don't know if he had that reputation. Did he have that reputation?
I don't know if he looked like this in Hollywood back then. I don't know. He looked like a happy person back then.
And partying had a different meaning in the 1920s and 30s and 40s than it does now. They weren't smoking all this pot and taking cocaine and
cocaine
maybe shooting up heroin.
Yeah, cocaine wasn't around, but yeah, it's like you never know, and this is why this job is so multifaceted. You look at these different individuals and their possible backgrounds, and it could be this behind it, could be that behind it. There's multiple scenarios, and it's like the dumbest thing in the world is to just look at this fantasy category of the Jews, and then here's a guy who had some Jewish background. That's it. He's part of that category. We figure it all out. Every moron can solve every case in 5 minutes because it's that easy, supposedly, right? Everybody can join and be an influencer, and then things don't work out. Now we're at war with Iran, and people are wondering, how did this happen? But they told us, these influencers, they told us Trump was, he was fighting the globalists, and he was just being so different, and he had a whole team behind him. What happened? These people are back to square one. They lost the allure of, we have our president, it's our guy, we put him in office, and he's doing what we want him to do. Now they're back to, okay, we're just cranks on the internet with a larger audience, and we're just regurgitating the same stuff that's been around for 200 years, and maybe in another 200 years we'll actually have positive results, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
nothing ever comes out of it.
I'm accused of being dishonest on X just about every day because you won't talk about Israel. You won't talk about how they control everything. You're a shill of Israel.
Yeah, and this is how anti-Semitism this is how anti-Semitism easily morphs into a broader hate campaign against non-Jews as well. Look at how the socialists initially 200 years ago, or more than 200 years ago, the socialists started to build their movement with a high degree of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy lore. They considered all capitalism to be conspiratorial. It's always going to be a big conspiracy with the corporations and banks. It cannot be any other way. They're the original modern conspiracy theorists. And so they built this thing for a long time with anti-Semitism. Even these later, around the year 1900, even the later Fabian socialists, they still talked about the Rothschilds and the bankers and the blah, blah, blah. They built this thing with anti-Semitism, then they got power in Russia, and then they killed regular people. They killed as many people as they possibly could, non-Jewish people, because it's like you built something on anti-Semitism and it becomes a broader hate campaign. And now everybody can become a target, even though it started out with anti-Semitism. They said, well, Jews are the enemy. Now everybody can be the enemy. Everybody who disagrees, everybody who's not, with the current line of what Moscow is saying. That's how it started. You see, when Lenin plagiarized this guy from Britain, this Hobson character, and the whole socialism idea is conspiratorial. They say capitalism is always going to be a conspiracy, and everyone's in it. So even if you're not Jewish, you're still a pig. You're a capitalist, imperialist pig. You're not a human. You're an animal. You're a pig. Pigs get slaughtered. And pigs roll around in the mud. You're not a human anymore. So now, even when leftists take out the Jewish element of what they consider to be the enemy, almost the entire concept of who the enemy is stays intact. Everybody who is not a leftist is parasitic or helping the evil imperialist parasites. So you have to be re-educated, you have to be reformed or killed. See, that's I think the universal cluster problem introduced by anti-Semitism. And it's like not even the right-wingers are immune to this problem, because now Alex Jones was attacked for decades. Alex Jones was attacked for decades for not being tough enough on the Jews. And then, Candace Owens became sort of more famous than he is, and she's younger and she's handsome and he's not. He's like fat and old. And so then she says or implies the Jewish conspiracy killed Charlie Kirk. And there's Egyptian planes and all this detail. And then Jones says, no, that's not true. You're making things up. But Jones made all this stuff up about Sandy Hook. So it's like these irrational people are attacking each other. And I think Candace Owens is glorifying the Muslim world. So she wants to be like a pro-Muslim truther. Right? And she has
yeah,
like
this.
It
Seems like that's what she's doing.
The moment she falls,
her tweet this morning was amazing. It was all about how Israel is basically the big bad. Look, I am criticizing the strategy of my country in the war. I did not, I wrote a piece against invading Iraq before George W. Bush did it. I didn't think it was. I thought it was morally okay. I didn't think it was strategically right. Now, so I wrote against it before he went in, but I kept my mouth shut once he went in, and I saw the opposition. I see now here very clearly the strategy is completely screwed up, and I'm extremely put out with this administration. This is an enemy of ours long term. I think we should. It's always best to be prepared and wait for them to strike first. This is a general rule of politics. I think Bismarck laid it down. He was pretty smart. But we don't have principles that we go by anymore, strategic or moral or political. It seems like President Trump, it's sort of like he says, "Oh, we can protect the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz." Lie, don't lie. You can't protect it. We got 2 burning, sinking tankers. We've got 3 merchant ships hit this past week in the Strait. Tankers won't go through. You can't get them insured. The oil terminals are shutting down. And now we've got a 30-day eviction notice from the Iranians. Leave, or this thing isn't going to be open again. And we've got our allies in panic. And our own public it's like 2/3 of the people are against this. I mean, if you had massive public support for this war, you could sustain it. And if your allies weren't screwed by it economically, you could sustain it. We have just made a horrible misstep. I'm afraid it's a strategic mistake.
But this time, Iran was really looking or really working on weapons of mass destruction. It's not like 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, they have enough weapons.
Maybe there's stockpiles somewhere. Maybe we find stockpiles at some point. But now
it's dispersed now. Good luck finding it now. I mean, look, they have enough uranium, we know, for 16 bombs. Some people say it's 11 or 12. I think the number's closer to 16. Now, this is something, and Trump says they can't be allowed. This is what Israel did. Israel said, we're going to nuke Iran if you don't come and help us. This is the thought some people have. Maybe Israel made this threat. That's a pretty awful threat. You're caught in a dilemma. What do? You have to wait. I mean, for them, as bad as it is for Israel, you have to wait for them to strike, because now what's the strategic importance of the Middle East to us? It's the oil.
Isn't it like
Israel, the oil. This is just the plain economic truth.
Wouldn't it be like a great obfuscation? Wouldn't it have been a great obfuscation technique to what we if that actually is kind of the dynamic right now? Israel says we're going to do this, unless America chooses another option. Wouldn't it be brilliant if all this, if a lot of this Epstein stuff and some other stuff can now be used to say on diplomatic channels, say to other countries, sorry, we're a mess. It's so complicated. We tried. America could say. America could claim, "Oh, we're a mess. We're sorry, we're a mess." What we're doing right now is the less harsh option. You don't want Israel to go nuts on you, so let us deal with it and blah 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 blah. I think it would be a great obfuscation
to be honest,
technique.
I think the United States could have said to Israel, if Israel's making that threat, the United States could say, "Look, we'll cut you off for the next 3 years of all of our foreign aid. We'll just cut you off if you use nuclear weapons on Iran."
Yes, but the thing is when there is, when you have some Jewish billionaires exerting some influence on American politics, I think it makes a great obfuscation technique. Or some of the Epstein stuff. It's like it would be perfect to create the impression that America is out of control, that it's like different factions and everybody's against each other.
I think America is out of control,
and nobody's steering nobody's steering the ship. I mean, I think the
well, you do. You have people steering the ship that don't know anything about steering a ship. I mean, Pete Hegseth, as the Secretary of War, has done something. Has his generals? I'm sure his generals, professional military guys, told him, we can't keep the straits open. I'm sure they must have told him that, because George W. Bush did not attack Iran, probably for the same reason.
But if I was in charge, if I was in charge and I was really devious, I would want to look completely out of control. I would want to look like a complete mess. Well,
he definitely does look out of control.
That would be my plan. I would want to look like an absolute mess, so I never have to be really accountable to other countries. In classic diplomatic fashion, it would be like a perfect obfuscation strategy to because you're dealing with these top-down dictatorial systems. Iran, North Korea, Russia. It's all so controlled. It's very, one guy is like the king or the czar, like Putin, and what they say goes, and they can change out every personnel that they want, and nobody can dare criticize the king or the czar. But America can pretend, well, at least there's like the option that they can pretend to be a complete utter chaos, impenetrable. Because if foreign influencers, if foreign people try to influence, infiltrate America and influence America, all they see is chaos. All they see is chaos. Imagine if the Russians are onto some the Russians are on to some American senator or some American, another American senator, the Russians will figure out, well, he's entangled with 5 other groups that want to influence this guy. What do we do with this? It just gets more complicated. It's a nightmare, right? Because if the Russians spend so much effort getting to Trump, entangling Trump, getting to his first wife, and blah 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 blah, and there's so many other people who make up these plans, and Trump is going to be Trump is going to retire in a few years. He's too old. He's going to be gone. So all this effort for so long on Trump, poof, it's gone. It's like things die. All the kinds of operations, they will die with Trump because he's not going to live forever. America is kind of a mess, but so is Europe. Europe seemed really, 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 really messy, but still it had very powerful empires that existed for a very long time, and they controlled different areas of the world. And this was like the European game when, okay, so you want to infiltrate the enemy. You have the enemy king, you have the enemy's family, you have the enemy's extended family, you have the bureaucracy that you want to infiltrate them culturally, and it just exhausts your resources. You want to spy on the enemy, but you're just spending money, and you're spending all these resources, and do you really get a clear picture? Or is all that you get a bunch of chaos, all this conflicting information? I mean, let's not forget, the Trump administration, or the current Republican administration, has just attacked a major ally of Russia. I mean, that's what it is. And that's kind of the same paradoxical thing that I saw with Reagan. When Reagan started out as a Democrat, and he was hanging out with the Hollywood guys, and political Democrat, and then he makes his right turn and he becomes president, and he was with all these different shady people with a Eastern European background, and then he became sort of like an anti-communist, or he had a stronger foreign policy. It's like did people predict this back then? I mean, did people expect Ronald Reagan, the Democrat dandy from Hollywood, did they expect him to end up becoming that kind of a president? It's odd, right?
That they expected him to become what kind of president?
Well, this Republican guy who was battling the Soviet Union in the 80s.
Well, remember, he supported Goldwater famously in 1964.
Yes.
And made a very famous address. And so he had been known as very conservative, I guess you could get economically libertarian, free market policies. He had been advocating them for years. He then surprised people by running for governor of California in 1966 and beating Pat Brown, the father of Edmund G. Brown Jr., who also was a governor. He was running for a second term, and he was very popular, and Reagan beat him because of this, movie star name recognition. And then he went on 2 terms of governor of California, and then went on to run unsuccessfully against President Gerald Ford in 1976, but then won the primaries in 1980 and 2-term president. It was a surprise because the media was very liberal. When Reagan became president, the media almost took a step back and became more middle of the road in its appearance. They were realizing the media was out of step with actual public opinion. Yeah. And this is something that's happened with Trump being elected on his second term, is that a lot of the media was very, very far to the left, and they kind of reined it in a bit. But I think now with Trump's missteps, you're going to see a strong push to the left, very strong push to the left.
Yeah, I mean the propagandists, they attacked they attacked Zelensky. They attacked Zelensky in Zelensky in Ukraine for having had an entertainer background. Trump had an entertainer background.
Yeah.
Reagan had an entertainer background.
Yes.
But people
Yeah.
said this is unheard of. How can somebody like that ever, be leader of a country? Don't they know anything about history? I'm betting that a lot of people, or many people, actually forgot or never really consciously remembered Reagan's earlier work as a media person or as an actor, right? Because why would they?
And yeah. Yeah, no, they remembered. Look, people made fun of it. You didn't have actors were considered to be quite low on the scale of the social scale. They're not considered to be super important folks. And of course that's an interesting thing when people are um, doing this kind of thing. Um, Actors, it's only recently that this has become a thing. And I think it's because of the importance of television and media. And of course, our presidents are thought to be communicators in media. They're almost like media spokesmen now. Um,
Yes.
but Trump is his lowbrow and his low IQ in his presentation. He's actually presenting for people who don't read, and he doesn't read. He really mirrors people who are at the 12-year-old level or less. And this is actually a problem because I think that he and Hegseth don't have the mental bandwidth. I can see it now in deciding on this war. There were so many things, so much knowledge that a president needs, and to listen to your advisors, which he doesn't do. Listen to the knowledgeable people. What are you getting yourself into? What's going to happen here? You've started a war. The American people are really good at supporting you when someone attacks us, like at 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. We went into those wars. We had a lot of more staying power. You go in, you make a war of choice where you're actually causing the war. Um, it's like, why did you do this? Look at all this damage people have to take. How many people are going to lose their retirements? How many people are going to lose their jobs? How many of our allies are going to actually maybe be tempted to switch sides against us because this is so damaging and they need the oil? They can't survive without it. We have just handed something really grim over to our enemies. Um, and I kept my mouth shut initially, thinking, well, maybe they know what they're doing. I did that with the Iraq War. I didn't think they did. I know he doesn't know what he's doing, and I know this is a fiasco. You can see it right now. Unless they can get the troops on the ground, they can beat them on the ground and liberate the country and get the people armed against this and get them on our side, then we win a spectacular victory.
Hmm.
But all that has to happen with the American people and most of the politicians going, don't know if this is the right thing. I mean, maybe we're stuck and we don't have a choice. If people see, understand, look, if you understand, if we bug out of the Middle East, if we end this war, we're finished. There's a long slide downhill from here where we're finished strategically. This is the strategic misstep that can unravel the United States.
Yeah, or
And
it's
and
going to.
unfortunately, if the American people understood what was at stake, they'd say, well, we don't like that he did this now, but we have to back it. That's what they would say. But of course, is he going to do it competently? If the public does back it, is it going to be a series of and he lies? We can hold the straits open. We've won a great victory, and then killing enemy leaders. I mean, he didn't do it. The Israelis dropped the 30 bombs that killed all these leaders, but he gave them the information to do it.
Hmm.
He basically gave the okay to kill these leaders and is bragging about it. This is all wrong. You don't kill the people you're negotiating with. This is crazy. I'm sorry. I just call it as I see it. It grieves me because it's my country and I want my country to defeat its enemies. And I don't want to see my country lose a war. It's terrible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see how this plays out. I mean, if the administration is going to make it work somehow, if they have a coalition over there and attempt maybe liberate half the country, they can book this as a victory. And I think this would change some of the calculations from Moscow and Beijing. And I think that there's like this parallel to the Cold War when the question is how much should we get involved in Iran? How important is Iran? Because the Soviets can't do both. The Soviets can't really go into Iran in a big way, and also go into Europe in a big way. And they did have back then. They did have a plan of a few hundred smaller nuclear bombs to be used just in case, when as a last resort. So they had like this plan going on as well back then. Yeah, well, we're gonna see how this plays out. I mean, I just get that feeling that there's more than meets the eye when it comes to the Republican Party and like it's almost as if they want a certain amount of perceived chaos. They want people guessing. They want all kinds of entanglements of public officials. When they're members of 10, 20 organizations and they have like business ties and they work with people with a foreign background. I think, there may be something there that we're not seeing, that is not meant to be seen, because when it's about bigger war, and wars can be won, or wars need to be won with strategic deception. A deception must be so good that the best professionals in the world will buy it, that the other side will believe it. And I think when people think of America's future, when you have like older families in America and they think 50 years ahead or 100 years ahead. It was this famous project for a new American century think tank before 9/11. They think ahead, or some people like to think ahead. And if you have long-term deception, something like the British did for a while, British did against the Germans. If you can pull that off, Britain wanted to appear confusing to the Germans. They made the Germans believe that Britain was a mess. You had the aristocrats who were pro-Nazi supposedly because of their German background. Then you had the left, and you had sort of the political middle, and the Germans bought it. The Germans actually bought it, and the Brits had to use traditional conspiracy mythology to make the Nazis like them, to make the Nazis trust the aristocrats. But it was the same aristocrats who had
the British were trying to get them to focus on the Soviet Union. That's
and the same British aristocrats, they had actually financed conspiracy bestsellers like Nestor Webster's books and others.
Did they finance that? Did the British government finance that?
Well, rich people, and Churchill advertised for it. He publicly said, this is something to check out. So this was like helping the genre.
And that was really, the original version of that was anti-Semitic. She cleaned it up later, but it was anti-Semitic conspiracy.
Yeah, and also the same aristocrats, the very same aristocrats, like the Crown, the House of Hessen, for example, that is part of that very extended royal family cluster. The House of Hessen originally recruited the Rothschilds. They would know that the conspiracy fairy tales are baloney, because they knew their own history. They knew that they recruited the Rothschilds.
Sure they did.
And so it's like maybe there's some long range deception going on. But if there is this long range deception going on, this would kind of exclude a lot of what we take for granted as an actual republic, with transparency and accountability and all the things that we think of when we think of America, because it was supposed to be different. And because if you have long range, if you have super long range, super effort deception, only a very tiny group of people would actually know about this stuff, and this is dangerous. This is inherently very dangerous.
I have a hard stop. I have to go, so we have to end now. We've been going for a while. I want to thank our listeners, and this has been another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host has been Alex Benesch. Take care.